Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We'll give it just a moment for people to join us before we get started. I see people still joining. We'll give it just a few more seconds for our attendees to join us. Well, thank you for coming and welcome to our first of this year, annual our quarterly DEI Knowledge Exchange webinars. I'm Judy Ellis, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory at AMS, and we're happy to have you with us. And I'm joined by my colleague, Paul Modley. Paul, I'll have you introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Judy. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, Paul Modley. I am the Managing Director for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion for AMS, and I have responsibility for our strategy across our global business.
Thank you, Paul. And I'm so pleased to have a really distinguished panel with us this afternoon who are joining us from across a number of our client organizations and organizations that we partner with to talk about not only our predictions for the year ahead, but some of the DEI trends that we're seeing. I definitely am seeing a lot of activity in this space in my role in leading our consulting area in DEI. But first, I'd like to introduce to you Beth Keeler, who is the Associate Vice President of Global Talent Acquisition at Merck. Beth, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me, Judy and Paul. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. As Judy said, I am the AVP in charge of Global Talent Acquisition. Merck operates really in many countries all around the world, and I'm responsible for hiring from junior levels all the way to the top. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Beth. We so appreciate you. We also have Kathi Enderes, who's the Senior Vice President and Research and Global Industry Analyst with the Josh Bersin Company. Kathi.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. Kathi Enderes, SVP Research and Global Industry Analyst with the Josh Bersin Company. If you know who we are or if you don't know who we are a research and advisory company specifically for HR, and we study all kinds of topics, including the topic of DEI, which has gotten a lot of traction, a lot of discussion this year, and that's a little bit of what I'm going to share about today. I'm joining you from Palo Alto, California today.
Thank you, Kathi. And I also want to introduce Kate Matthews, who's the Vice President of DE&I and Global External Engagement and Talent Development with BP. Kate, would you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Judy. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. I'm coming to you from London, my home in London. I work for BP, which is a global integrated energy company. I've worked in D&I for a few years. My background is human resources, and I know this is going to be a really interesting conversation based on some of the pre-chats that we've had as a group. So I'm really looking forward to this session.
Thank you, Kate. And as you mentioned, we have been really fortunate to have some robust discussion about what we're seeing from our various vantage points in the DEI landscape. And I'd now like to just encourage you, those of you who are joining us, to feel free to use the chat to drop questions in. We'd love to hear from you. Our plan is to have Paul kind of interview our panelists with some questions. And then if we have time, we hope at the end to field some Q&As from you. So feel free to drop in the chat where you are, what you're seeing in your environment, and we'll try to pick those up. But now I'd like to turn it over to Paul and our panel.
Thank you, Judy, and I'm delighted that the sun has decided to come out and shine on us for the next hour, which is a bit of a surprise in London at the moment. But yeah, really, really excited for the conversation. And Kathi, I wonder if you can kick us off, please, and give us a view as to what you are seeing in terms of emerging DEI trends for the year ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Paul. And it's DEI is really a big topic right now for a number of reasons. Well, first, thinking about the overall labor environment and workforce environment, DEI is arguably more important than ever because we have ongoing and significant labor shortages around the world. The workforce expectations on companies are changing significantly too. So companies expect people expect their companies to act in a much more inclusive, much more equitable way. And they're not afraid to take their talent elsewhere if they don't get what they need. So employees are very empowered because labor shortages are getting kind of worse and worse for companies. And I think you all feel that, whether you're in talent acquisition or in any other position in HR. So DEI is critically important right now because the workforce is also getting much more diverse and their expectations are changing. At the same time, of course, especially in the US here, we have increasing legal and political challenges. So DEI is a little bit in the crossfire. Sometimes it's hard to not get political when you talk about DEI, especially here. We're not going to talk politics, but let's just say it's hard to stay away from politics a lot of times. And companies are responding to that. Companies are thinking about how do they need to change their DEI strategy to make it much more pragmatic, much more business focused, much more embedded in the core of the business itself. At the same time, of course, this was always the case that good DEI was always business embedded. But now more than ever, companies are thinking about how can we make it much more part of the business itself. Especially in Europe, there's some tendencies and some discussions to integrate DEI into the sustainability efforts. So basically making sure that it's broader of the environmental, sustainable, and governance effort. That actually works pretty well too for companies because it makes it much more kind of an enterprise priority rather than just an HR priority. And with all of that, the role of the Chief Diversity Officer is also getting kind of a major overhaul, if you want. Thinking about how can we adjust and how do we have to adjust the Chief Diversity Officer role in a world where we integrate DEI into every single operational unit, into the operational processes of the company, and how do we make sure that they have also the Chief Diversity Officer and the DEI team has kind of the impact that they could have to drive the business forward, not just to kind of support the company in legal and compliance efforts. So those are kind of some of the trends that we see emerging this year.
Thanks, Kathi. And there's lots to unpick there, and I'm sure we will come back to some of the points that you've raised. I particularly like the point around integrating DEI efforts with ESG. I'm absolutely seeing that in terms of some of the conversations that I'm having with clients and peers in my network. There's also a term that's being increasingly used as well around social impact. And organizations are looking to measure the kind of social impact of their DEI efforts and their ESG efforts. So good to see that you're seeing that sort of that focus as well.
Yeah, no,
yeah,
absolutely.
I'm sure we're going to come back and kind of cover some of the points that you have raised there. Beth, I wonder if I could come to you next, and we've certainly some of the work and some of the kind of desk research that we have done, that we're seeing that kind of that skills approach to hiring, reskilling is absolutely a trend that's there. And you've previously talked to us about your Skills First program at Merck, and I'm wondering if you can describe the impact that this is having on your DEI initiatives.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I think it's been a really big paradigm shift at Merck. It's been a huge change. We've seen it change how we attract, develop, everything about what we're doing with talent. It has seen the impact of skills first hiring, and we're seeing that with, when we look at the different modalities of how we source talent, we've seen it come in through, obviously full-time hires, and we are changing job descriptions, and we are actually recredentialing and seeing that different opportunities that maybe we previously were on, and I think a lot of companies would be on default to say a job would start with a 4-year degree and XYZ number of years of experience. And I think when we really evaluated that and said, what is actually needed, what skills are needed for somebody to hit the ground running versus credentials that they need to hit the ground running, which actually, in fact, for many jobs, maybe those credentials may not actually have been needed for certain roles. So I think what has been fantastic is, one, I think skills first hiring has become part of the vernacular, and I think a lot of people are just understanding what that means and what barriers may have been in place without a focus on skills first hiring. But I think we've seen it really impact in 2022. We saw 900 jobs get posted without a bachelor's degree. We know that that's increased even multifold since then, since we're now in 2024, but we know that was 2 times higher than anything we'd ever done in the previous year. So it has gained a lot of momentum, and I loved what Kathi was saying about business-led, because I do think skills first has moved to something that the business really understands and is completely behind and really supportive. We've seen the hires not just be full-time hires, but we've also seen an openness to apprenticeship type hires, internships, and ways to give individuals access to corporate roles where maybe they hadn't thought of that as a career path before. So it really has been a paradigm shift, and I do think it's had a significant impact in our hiring.
And you referred to the kind of business. How have you worked with your business leaders to kind of get them on board with this? And I presume it's an ongoing sort of dialogue that you're having with them.
It has not. I would say, if you, and I know I talked about this before, initially there was a lot of this was a big change, right? So there was a lot of conversation, there was a lot of data that we showed, but honestly, at this point, we're well past that. And I actually think our business leaders are getting up and doing webcasts, talking about the importance, the impact it's had on their business. It's not it's no longer sort of that, it's not something, again, that I feel like is HR led. I actually think the business is really behind it. And I think the challenge can be getting out of, at the hiring manager level, making sure that they are adapting and understanding this and making sure that we actually do have an openness to bringing in talent based on the skills. So I think that's where we are continuing to see a lot of support from leadership. That's something I wouldn't say that we're still working on, thankfully.
And if there's a piece of advice you would offer up to a kind of TA leader or a HR leader that might be on this call who are about to embark or are considering this within their organizations, what it's difficult to kind of pick on one piece of advice, but what would you say to that leader?
Yeah, I think Kathi, you talked about talent shortages, right? I mean, one, it just opens up talent pools. You will get more applicants. I mean, that's probably, number one, if you're focusing on skills. And again, I think getting it's just awareness of what impact, certain job descriptions may have had in limiting a talent pool. And, this actually, when we went about this initially, it was showing when you put all this criteria in place and then get frustrated that you're only getting a few applicants, maybe you need to look at the criteria. And so, and many times I've sort of said this before, it's like, well, TA isn't getting us enough applicants. And then, we've gone back and it's been a much more partnership kind of conversation to say what is getting in the way. And the other thing I think that's having an impact is virtual and hybrid work environments, I think are helping too. But I would say if you were going to start with data, look at what your current criteria is, look at how that is impacting your candidate slates, and think about making some changes and see, start small. I don't think you want to start with, okay, we're going to re-credential, hundreds and hundreds of jobs. I would start small, get some people behind you, show the successes. The other thing that I think happens is when you have success with skills first hiring, it really is something that it kind of is not something you have to, as you would say, convince anymore. It's something that really takes off on its own.
Yeah. Great advice, and I love that the point about like keep it small, kind of keep it as a because you can't clearly boil the ocean with this because it will become too big. Thank you. Great perspective there. Kate, if I can come to you next and talk about psychological safety. You've talked about how you are embedding psychological safety in BP as a commercial imperative to support, I guess, more challenging conversations that you want to hold within the business around particularly polarizing views. Tell us more about this in terms of how you are doing this.
Sure. So I think it's one of those sort of perfect moments where this is exactly where what we need to be doing in society generally, but in BP, what's become apparent is psychological safety. So we've always known that psychological safety is important. We all know, everyone on the call knows, that when you feel psychologically safe, you perform better, you make better decisions, you engage with others, you're going to win more business, you're just going to be at your best as an organization and as individuals. And the conversations that we have in the D&I space can mean that some of our colleagues from underrepresented communities don't feel psychologically safe. So we know that this is something we need to tackle from a D&I point of view, so that our underrepresented colleagues can show up and be their best. But the really important intersection for us as an engineering company is safety. So safety is the #1 priority for BP, physical safety. And there is no way that we're going to achieve the level of physical safety that we need to without psychological safety. So our colleagues need to feel able to point out if they see a missing rung, to use a sort of fairly useful analogy. And if they, for any reason, they don't feel they can do that, they feel they're going to be, called out for doing that in a way that isn't constructive, then that doesn't happen. Then we're going to have some other consequences. So there's lots of reasons why psychological safety is so important for us as a business. So what we've done this year is go about creating a toolkit for employees and leaders called Courageous and Compassionate Conversations. We thought really hard about the title of that piece because we didn't want to call it difficult or challenging, because they can be difficult and challenging, but they don't have to be. But sometimes they do take courage, and they require compassion to be done well. So the intention of the toolkit is to help people understand what we call the ingredients. There are 5 ingredients that we need to have to make a good, courageous and compassionate conversation, to enable psychological safety for everyone taking part in the conversation. And we've had quite a lot of fun role modeling bad conversations in some informal sessions, going, here's how you don't do it and what needs to change. So there's kind of interactive kind of live sessions we've done with some colleagues, and we're going to be doing more of as we roll out through the organisation. So, to your point, Beth, it's good to start small. We've done a few small sessions. The feedback has been incredibly positive particularly from our HR colleagues around the resources that we've put out there, and it just feels like an itch that needed scratching. So it's something that people really want. And actually, for what it's worth, one of the other things we're really focused on is, of course, value. So what is the work we're doing, the right work? So we have a little challenge for ourselves. We're developing a habit called What's the Value? So every decision we make, what is the value of this piece of work? What is the value of this decision that we're making? And actually that takes courage to challenge one another sometimes, because we get kind of excited about our pet projects and our own work. So to actually have the courage to have that conversation. So are you sure that this is the right decision in a courageous way? So we're finding lots of new ways to use this resource. And actually it's helped us reach a broader audience. Sorry, Paul, I was going to say, it's not we're not marketing it as a D&I tool. We're marketing it as this is a useful tool. So it happens to come from a D&I need, but actually it's landing in lots of places, which is really good.
And I was just about to ask, and I think you've answered it, it can be used in a one-on-one situation or a kind of group situation around any topic that is causing some angst in a team environment.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've demoed it. We've demoed it of things like, we had a conversation about women's football just after the Women's World Cup, and like, how did you respond to the incident in Spain, for example? Or we on the ground in the organisation, it can be to discuss. If you really want to go there, you can go and talk about trans rights. That it creates a space for a topic that people can find tricky to understand. And to navigate and to know what questions are appropriate. It really holds that space for people and creates an opportunity for conversation, because we know that we can only make progress through dialogue. So we're really wanting to stop any kind of movement towards cancelling one another or saying you can't talk about things. We're trying to really create an open dialogue as much as possible.
Yeah. Great, love it. Sounds like a brilliant tool. Thank you. Right. We would not have a conversation unless we talk about AI, of course. AI is absolutely here to kind of drive change in the world of DEI. And I've been in a conversation with LinkedIn for a couple of hours this morning with various organizations talking about the impact of AI around DEI. And I just wanted to share some stats I heard this morning, which I thought were interesting, and I will kind of ask a question for all three of you. What I heard this morning, that in the last 12 months, there's been a 70% increase in AI conversations. No surprise with that, I guess. There's been a 7-fold increase in conversations on the responsible application of AI, which is good to hear. And then interestingly, it's all about sevens. 70% of the conversations are driven by Gen Z and millennials. Again, I guess no surprise there, given that they are probably faster adopters of technology. I just thought I'd share those stats. So the question for all of you, and Kathi, I'll come to you first if you don't mind. What are your views on the impact of DEI, the impact of AI on DEI, both in terms of the opportunities and obviously the challenges? And Beth and Kate, I'll be coming to you for your views as well.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, first I wanted to add a little bit to the previous discussion, because I loved how both Beth and Kate, you both actually provided case studies and examples for this business integration of DEI, because both of these areas, whether that's skill-based hiring or whether that's psychological safety, could be seen as kind of an HR and DEI thing, but it really, you came from it from a business approach, right? You said we have these skills gaps, Beth, right? And we have these talent gaps, and Kate, you came from it from a safety angle, right? So like, how can we increase safety? So I think these are really powerful and great examples. Now going to AI, because we can't, like, as you said, Paul, we can't have any discussion without touching on AI. And it's interesting that you said most of the discussions were led by millennials and by Gen Z. I mean, we talk a lot with HR leaders. Usually they are Gen X or baby boomers for the most part, but they talk a lot about AI too. Well, I think there's huge opportunities. We really see that the opportunities are massive in, for example, in improving the recruitment process, like the skill-based hiring, as Beth talked about. AI can help with that a lot. AI can help you understand what are adjacent skills, what are the skills you already have in your organizations, what are the skills that your competitors are hiring for, how do you infer the skills that people might have without them having to fill out long profiles and all of that. AI can help a lot with recruiting, of course, also automate and streamline recruiting processes, make it easier to apply to jobs. All of these kind of automation, augmentation areas are massive, like just streamlining, getting a bigger talent pool. On skill-based hiring, for example, we modeled how much bigger the talent pool gets when you don't just look at qualifications or previous experience or previous roles and look at skills adjacencies, kind of close skills. And it's usually an order of magnitude. You get 2 to 5 times bigger talent pool. So massive opportunities to do that with AI. AI can also, of course, help with bias detection. So if you use it right, AI can detect biases in job descriptions. It can detect biases in performance reviews, in your language that you're using, in kind of the biases that you might have in compensation. So pay equity, all of those kind of things, AI can help with that a lot if you use it right. It can also personalize development opportunities, skill-based kind of development opportunities to say, if I don't have the exact skill that we might need, for example, for this job, but I have an adjacent skill, how can I amplify my skills? How can I move, for example, if I'm maybe in marketing and I want to move into data science, I might have adjacent skills. How can I amplify my skills to move into a hard-to-fill role, into a higher priority role, kind of career pathways informed by AI, and just generally having data-driven insights on using AI and making each of us smarter. We see the opportunity that AI can really turn all of us, whether we're in HR and talent acquisition in any kind of area or anywhere in the organization, into these super-powered humans where we add insights on areas that we didn't know a lot about. We can ask the AI, the generative AI questions, and we can tap into knowledge that would usually be very hard to access. So like that kind of broader, kind of all around knowledge that we can get when we use AI, very powerful. So if I'm in talent acquisition, for example, I might not know a lot about learning and development, but I might have an AI assistant, and we actually built our own AI assistant called Galileo that taps into all of our research that is specifically for HR people, talent acquisition people, learning people, to understand kind of other domains without being an expert in all of them. So helping us build much broader skills and much more full stack capabilities, as we call that. So lots of opportunities, lots of challenges too, of course. I don't know if you wanted to go to the concerns as well.
Give me a concern, give me an overriding concern that you would have about the application of AI with DEI.
Well, I mean, the biggest part is what we call algorithmic bias, right? AI has a very important opportunity to actually remove bias, but it's completely dependent on the data that you feed into the algorithm, into the AI, basically. So it has the opportunity and the challenge, actually, the concern to replicate bias that you might have in your data significantly, do it much faster than any of us could do the biases, right? Because it basically, if you feed it the data that's biased, and lots of data is biased, there have been lots of experiments, of course. When you asked, for example, in the beginning, I saw an experiment on ChatGPT where it asked ChatGPT, somebody asked ChatGPT to describe, for example, a kindergartner. And of course, it said, it was her, right? And like a firefighter, and of course it was a he. So like all of, because most of the data that came in was like describing kindergartners as women and firefighters as men. Lots of those kind of examples. Or if you feed it that your best tech candidate is a white man in their 30s who graduated from Stanford, of course you're gonna look only for those people rather than look like broader. So the data, and it's up to us to control for those biases. The algorithm in itself is of course not biased, but the data can be biased, and we have to control for that. So I think that's the biggest risk that we have here.
Brilliant, thank you, Kathi. Beth, can I come to you for your views, both in terms of the opportunities and the challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could do better than Kathi there. She was pretty robust, but I would definitely just talk about the inclusiveness on the job description. I think that is one area that's a real opportunity. I think the other ways would be, if you think about, when you are working with tools that you may have, like I was thinking accessibility and making, everything mobile, whether you have different methods of getting roles out to candidates, all the things that you talked about, Kathi. I think there were so many things. When we think about career path, one of the things I've seen that's so cool is like, you may have an ultimate job you want to get to, and then there's maybe 3 steps a person has taken previously to get to that job. And, could you proactively have roles that were on another person's career path sent to you as they become open, because you've said, this is where I ultimately want to go. So I think there's ways that you can be made aware of things and have things come to your attention without a lot of times things have been, manual, or a person having to tell you that. Now maybe you can use technology and automation that things come right into your inbox or your feed that say, this could be a great path for you to take because it got this person to that role you ultimately want to get to. So I think there's a lot of good ways. I will say I think there's concerns. Obviously there's concerns. I think the bias that it can make a job description more inclusive and remove bias, but when if God forbid there's something where there's a risk where bias exists and then it's multiplied fast and furiously, that's a concern. I think candidate matching that's coming from an algorithm is concerning as well. So those are some of the things that concern us, but I think, selfishly, not without even the focus on DEI, I think there's huge opportunity for us to move faster, be more less focused on administrative things and having more time to focus on the candidate and figure out their skills, be thinking open-mindedly about candidate qualifications versus, sometimes I think just this is sort of selfish thinking about the talent acquisition function, but sometimes I think administration can be such a distraction versus having time making sure your selection processes are as consistent as possible without bias and objective, putting your energy there versus on some other administrative pieces that I think AI could probably take care of.
Great. Thank you, Beth, for sharing. Kate, you have the challenging job to kind of jump in now with any other views that you may have. Anything you want to add?
I've got a couple of things. One thing I'm really excited about AI is helping people like me with dodgy memories, because I think that would be amazing to help. And I'm looking forward to the one that floats over people's heads with their names, something like that, so that I know I've met you and I can't remember your name. I think seriously though, in terms of from a DE&I point of view, there's just a couple of things that we do need to keep a watch out for. So one thing would be, as AI does the great work of taking away some low value work and automating it, making it more efficient, and giving more access to good work for our workforce, ensuring that doesn't have the unintended consequence of affecting particular segments of society more than others. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, as we're looking at this, as we shift our organizations towards using AI to create different job design, to make sure we're not, that certain groups are not being affected. So of course we know that some groups from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or other backgrounds might be doing more of that lower skilled work. So what are we going to do to ensure a just transition through to the post AI sort of work environment? So that's one concern that we need to be ahead of. And then I think the other one is just think to how we use data generally. So I notice my organization, we have lots of very cerebral engineers and data-led individuals, and it's really important to know data can only tell you so much. It can often tell you the what, but doesn't generally tell you the why, not always anyway. And it's important not to do the sort of correlation does not equal causation thinking. So as we're using AI to problem solve, to be critically thinking about the solutions that are coming through, and that we're not overlaying our own human biases and assumptions on the why things are happening. So that's just two things that sort of come to mind when I look forward to how we might start to use it more in work.
Great. One of the things I heard this morning at this session was that we, as individuals, we should all look at AI as a job share partner. They're going to really help us all to do better things, to free up the time that maybe, you know, we spend a lot of time doing research or kind of stumbling over writing comms or whatever it is. So I thought that was quite good. Certainly something I will try and apply going forward. Thank you. Just looking at a time check. Judy, is there any questions that we maybe should look at right now, or should we keep going? I know there's a few. Oh.
Sorry, I was muted. We've had just an interesting question. Someone asked, is there a global DEI-friendly workplace label recognized and trusted worldwide, as it's nice to read on a company's website what they do in the area and how important it is, but how can we know if they're really walking the talk? And I'll just throw it out for the panel. I'm not aware of one, but there is particular organizations that you can aspire to have some kind of designation like we have in the UK, a disability confidence marker, and you can move up in your designation as you make your processes more and more accessible. But I'm not aware, panelists, if you are of any other kind of DEI-friendly labels for an organization.
I'll just share something that we did as part of our DEI study that we did a couple of years ago. We actually compared these kind of designations from different groups, Diversity Inc., two Forbes kind of designation, one from Fortune, and Glassdoor D&I ratings. And we just wanted to see not which one is best, but how much overlap there is. And there were 205 companies on these 5 kind of lists. And guess how much overlap there was on who was on all 5 of these lists? How many companies out of 205? I'll have you guess it. Any takers?
No. No overlap? No overlap?
One company. One company was on all 5 lists. 3 companies were on 4 lists. 9 companies were on 3 lists. 35 companies were on 2 lists, and 157 were on 1 list. So not to say what's good or bad, but literally there was hardly any overlap. And most of the companies that were on several lists were tech companies. So and arguably tech companies are not, maybe, I don't know if you would say that blanket wise, but not always the most inclusive and diverse companies. So that just goes to show, I think, there's lack of definition of what good looks like and what to aspire to. So we wanted to see it. It was kind of surprising how little overlap there was. So it's hard to get there if you don't know what good looks like.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Maybe there's an opportunity for somebody there.
We do see candidates in several studies that's one of the things they're interested in, and that they are checking to see what they can do to suss out how inclusive is an organization. So be interesting to get more insight in what those decision points are.
Yeah, I think one thing that candidates can do. Sorry, just one point. I think they could look at what I would trust maybe most so is what other employees are saying, right? So what are they saying on Glassdoor? How inclusive do they feel it is? Because others might be, well, we submit these processes and these practices to some kind of governing body, but the employees might not feel it. So I think that the employee voice is always most powerful.
Kate, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was very much echo that. I think a lot of companies, I've worked for a few companies, and I've had current colleagues say, well, that company over there who I have worked for before will say they're doing great work, and I'll say, well, as an ex-employee, I didn't feel it on the inside. So I know they talk a good talk. I think that the best thing to do is to have a look at, you know, what is the, I mean, if the company's talking about D&I, that is a good thing. That means it's on their priority. At BP, it is one of our commitments, and it's part of our sustainability framework. And then we publish an annual DE&I report, so a dedicated external report, which is intended to give examples of what we are where we are in action. What are we actually doing? So to demonstrate that we're not just talking about it, but that we are doing it, and to bring the employee voice to that. So, and many companies, large companies, do that. Of course, some of the most inclusive companies will be small companies, and they are kind of doing amazing work. And I often hear about practices in smaller companies that I you know, I'm very envious and wish I could do at scale at BP. And there are going to be pockets of BP that are super inclusive and pockets which are not. And so I think that's to answer the question. No, I'm not aware of one. But there are some excellent examples, and I agree with you, Kathi. It's talk to the employees, see what their actual experience is.
Great, thank you. Right, we said at the outset we weren't going to be talking about politics, but we're going to slightly pivot to talk about last year's Supreme Court decision in the US on affirmative action. And this is primarily aimed at Kathi and Beth, but Katie, you may have a view as well, around what impact we're seeing in terms of organizations and their DEI initiatives as a result of that decision. And Beth, I don't know if do you have a view that you want to talk about?
So I think, yeah, I don't think companies, at least, you know, I'll talk about Merck. We've not changed, you know, our approach is, we've always been really committed and open to, you know, our diversity programs, and that has not, we have not seen a change. And I think I think how we create sources of talent, you know, whether it's, you know, universities or diversity events, you know, what we're after is trying to have applicant pools that reflect reflect the world and reflect the patient base. And I think, unfortunately, well, I will say fortunately, I think companies still have the ability to go out and choose the events and where they want to go. And I think we are just as committed as ever, and that won't change as a result of any ruling or anything that may have changed. I think we are just as committed as ever. And I think the responsibility will be for us to continue to ensure that those sources are, in fact, you know, whether it be a school, that they are maintaining, you know, the diverse candidate, you know, our student populations, and you know, as we go to events, that's what they're representing, is the population and the patient population that we serve. So I think we have not changed our commitment. I think I think though it's going to have an impact, I think, you know, at the level for sure.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that, Beth. Kathi, what are you seeing in terms of your kind of helicopter view across the US as a result of this?
Yeah, we see actually a few things that might be related to the Supreme Court decision, might be related also to the broader economy. So I'll just mention them, and then how we see companies respond. So one thing that we noticed is actually that job postings for DEI roles have gone down in the last year in the US by 48%. So basically companies are hiring less for DEI roles. But that could have to do with the job market. It could have to do with economic situations. It could have to do with embedding DEI more into the business, so less like DEI roles and more kind of just DEI practices. Because at the same time, we also see that 92% of companies actually have not decreased their investment in DEI. So on one hand, they're hiring less DEI people, but on the other hand, they're not actually decreasing their investment in DEI programs and initiatives and kind of support for the business. So it's a little bit interesting to see like that dichotomy. What we take from that is really emphasizing including DEI into the business itself, rather than having these maybe standalone teams, I should say. On the other hand, I think what companies are also doing, some companies are just looking more closely at their DEI initiatives to make sure that they are compliant with legal standards. So making sure that they can't be seen as quotas, preferential treatment based on race and gender, just to make sure basically they're not kind of doing something that might be construed as maybe disenfranchising other groups, like rather than kind of your racial and gender priority groups, that kind of thing. I think the other thing that they're also doing, a couple of more things that companies are doing in response is some companies are broadening their DEI focus if they hadn't done it before. And I know the most advanced companies like Merck or others have already looked at diversity criteria that go beyond race and gender. So they're looking at cognitive diversity, socioeconomic backgrounds, veteran status, disability status, like all of those kind of broader, and also intersectionality, basically. So just broadening that focus as well, which is of course a good thing, right? So looking at beyond race and gender and broadening that focus to say what other diversity criteria can we bring to the table. And the last one is also a good thing, emphasizing much more inclusion and equity, not just diversity, because what we found in our study on DEI is we say inclusion is the goal and diversity is the result. If you don't have inclusion and equity, you can't really drive diversity forward. So looking beyond just diversity numbers, basically, and thinking about how can we create this inclusive environment, this equitable environment for advancement, for development, for growth, that will help us meet our diversity goals. So looking like broadening that aspect as well, which all of them are actually positive trends.
Yeah, it's all good. That's really positive to hear. Great, thank you. Kate, from a BP perspective, do you have a view on the ruling and how it's impacting what's going on in the US in your business?
Well, we do. The US is a really, really important territory for us. We we employ an enormous number of people, and it's a very key part of our business strategy. The Gulf of Mexico. We've got a number of refineries in North America, as well as other businesses. So, I mean, our response has been our head of country has sent a note internally to reinforce the fact that nothing's changing with our focus on DE&I. We remain committed. We think D&I is a priority and extremely important to our future success. So there's been no shift of position. Of course, we'll look to make sure that we're legally compliant, and and as we always would, but we're not changing our focus. I think it drives us. Quite often these challenges, when they come up, they feel uncomfortable at first, but they can drive really positive behaviours. I always find when I'm told my budget's being cut, which has happened so many times over my career, my first reaction is, it's a disaster, and then you realise I'm just going to have to be more efficient, and it's going to mean that I have to be more innovative in my approach. And I think in this example, it means that we're just required to be even more clear about the business imperative and the why of the work that we're doing, and embed it in the business, as we've been talking about over the past hour or so. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's sharpening our skills.
Yeah, great, thank you. Right, we've got time for one more question, and then we will open it up to, because I think there are still a couple of questions on the chat. So the question, and Kathi, you've set us up nicely. You talked about investments in DEI, and it's really good to hear that 92% of companies have not decreased investment. But I suppose, as hopefully in the next 12 months we see, the economy, the global economy, really kind of bouncing back and recovering, we see increased hiring volumes across all organisations. I suppose the question is, what do DEI teams need to prioritise to support their TA colleagues in that bounce back? And Beth, I wondered, from your perspective, what do you need? What support do you need from your DEI team to help you to support, future hiring within Merck?
So I think continuing to keep the drumbeat and the importance of this. I think leadership, I love that you said, Kate, that, your leadership's actually sent out a note saying that nothing's changed. And I think that needs to continue, and for leaders to be very public in their commitment and reinforce that and back it up with their actions and whatnot. And that's probably what we need to continue. And I think as I've said, we haven't seen, thankfully, we are probably part of the 92% that hasn't seen a change to our strategy. But I think that just as importantly, being incredibly visible and referencing it in everything you do. And I think you talked about this, Kathi, and like sustainability, and there's so many different ways that you can showcase that commitment. And I think being really intentional about that is probably what we need to continue. We need that overlay so that we continue with our work and recognize the importance within the company.
Thank you, Beth. Kate, from a BP perspective, what do you think your TA colleagues are looking for out of the DEI function in BP to support the next 12 months?
Not a lot of partnership and thinking about how to show up, and lots of educational pieces around language and nuance in the DE&I space, because there's so much that changes in our space. And actually, I spend a lot of time with colleagues just working on confidence, and coming back to that, let's having dialogues. I think that it's really about actually coming right back to that, the question that somebody asked, but actually making sure that we are walking the talk, so that our TA colleagues aren't going out there going, come and join BP, it's really inclusive, and then people joining and finding it's really not. So I think actually delivering on what we're here to do is probably the key thing.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then Kathi, your sort of helicopter view again in terms of what you think DEI teams need to be gearing up for to support their TA colleagues in the next 12 months.
Yeah, we really see like 5 things that overall we in HR and DEI and talent acquisition can do to drive this forward. First one, and we haven't talked about that, is, and it's probably the most important thing, is how can we listen to employees, to candidates, hearing what they're saying and then acting on it. So listening to how inclusive, how diverse is the company, how do these actions resonate with employees and with candidates, what do they need, and then acting on those results. And so the DEI colleagues can, of course, support or partner with the talent acquisition team to say, what feedback do we get from candidates? What feedback do we get from employees? How is it when you walk into the door, as Kate, you said, when you walk into the door, is it actually what we imagined it to be, or is it something completely different? And that also includes our interviewing panels, for example. Are they diverse? Are we seeing kind of role models in the different groups that we can aspire to if we're a candidate or if we're an employee? All of those kind of things. What are the barriers to diversity, equity, inclusion, and how can we respond to that? So that's the first one. The second one we talked about as well a little bit is how can we make sure that DEI is embedded in talent acquisition and that we strengthen the capabilities of HR people, but then also of talent acquisition people in DEI. And you mentioned, Kate, you mentioned training them, helping them kind of use the right language and not be afraid of kind of talking about DEI, because there's lots of concerns in HR, even on HR business partner side or talent acquisition side, to say the wrong thing and then kind of, I think, just offend somebody. And so how can we help build that muscle, that DEI muscle and capability? Critically important. And of course, embedding DEI into talent acquisition, working together and saying, well, somebody said to me, a DEI leader in a large tech company said to me when we were doing the study, she said, we don't see there's good recruiting and there's diverse and inclusive recruiting. It's the same thing, right? You can't be good at talent acquisition if you're not diverse and inclusive in your talent acquisition. And I think that's the kind of combination that we need to see. Senior leadership commitment is the third one. Kate, I loved how you talked about too, that your CEO and your leadership team says we're not changing course, making sure basically that this voice resonates with candidates as well. And but kind of that they hear this not as lip service, but just as basically this is really part and parcel of everything that we do, and it's going to make getting diverse talent much easier if you have that kind of CEO, senior leadership commitment. Then how you set goals, how you measure all of this, very important. We talked about having inclusion goals, not just diversity goals. And that includes, of course, in talent acquisition as well. How can we make sure that people, once they come join us, that they feel this is an inclusive culture and not kind of say, well, I came here, it looked like it would be great, but it's really not. So, because otherwise you'll damage your kind of diversity as well. The last thing is, how can we create accountability for results at all levels in the organization? So how can managers be part of that? Hiring managers be part of that drive to create more diverse and inclusive talent in their teams? How can we help them understand why this is a good thing for the business? And distributing that kind of accountability, not just to the DEI team or talent acquisition team, but really across the organization, so every manager is accountable for that. So those are kind of the 5 things that we see as critical here.
Thank you for kind of rounding out for us. That's some great tips there. Right, 4 minutes to go. Judy, we may have time for one question from the audience.
Yes, Kate, it's for you specifically. They've asked, how did you overcome speaking the truth to power where people may fear challenging a boss or a leader within BP with your psychological safety toolkit?
So with the toolkit, what we've done is frame what the empowering factors need to be. So for a start, both people need to want to be in the conversation. So there are some conversations which this won't work. So we do have official speak up channels, we do have escalation routes and so on. So this isn't intended to tackle really spiky, difficult things like that. This is more about let's get something that needs a bit of courage out there. And then it's about making sure that there is a contract around the conversation. So everyone knows why they're there, everyone understands what the ground rules are, and you have actually kind of almost like safe words. So if somebody is feeling that they no longer feel psychologically safe, there's an agreed sort of signal that's happened, and everyone goes, okay, I'm going to pause and step away. So there's just some things like that make the space safe. It's a practice, it's a habit. So it's not something that we encourage people to start by choosing something not too difficult or controversial, and have some fun with it, and then build it into a habit as a team, ideally, that they can then go, do you know what, I need to try a courageous and compassionate conversation with you, which might be you, one person, us. Is that okay? And everyone knows what that means, and you can step into that space. And we've actually done that in my team. And it's just such a relief actually to go, okay, I understand this could be uncomfortable, but I know what the parameters are for this conversation. It's a bit like the challenge we will have giving feedback, right? Until you do it regularly, it feels really uncomfortable. But the more you do it, the easier it gets, and the kinder it is.
Great, thank you.
I think that helps.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at time, Judy. Shall we close?
Yes, thank you all so much, panelists. There's been so many nuggets here. I've been taking notes throughout. Appreciate your time and your experience, which really shines through. And for all of you who joined us, encourage you to join our next webinar, which will be held on July 11th. The topic we'll be delving into even more is AI and DEI and how they relate to each other. So again, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
everyone.
day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.